welcome to the podcast of the Gem State Chronicle. My name is Brian Allman. The purpose of this platform is to bring you news and analysis that empowers you to make positive change in Idaho. Remember to visit gemstatechronicle.com for all my work, as well as breaking news, press releases, and guest editorials. Subscribe for free or support my work at gemstate.substack.com. Please also check out our new sponsor for this month, the iloveidaho.org voter guide. That's iluvidaho.org. 4 years ago, I sat in the Ford Center bleachers during the 2020 Idaho GOP State Convention in Nampa. I was an alternate delegate, and I was paying close attention to the proceedings on the floor. The delegates were arguing over some resolution. I don't remember what it was, but even if it passed, it would have meant nothing. It was essentially just pointless words. I texted my counterpart delegate a picture of Don Quixote charging at a windmill, because that's what it seemed like everyone was doing. I think there's a lot of tilting at windmills in politics today. Candidates and elected officials can passionately opine on things that don't matter, or things that have no chance of going anywhere. Politics, I believe, is the balance of idealism and pragmatism. You lean too far either way, and you end up failing. Too much idealism, and you get nothing done. You just point and sputter at events that transpire, all in the name of getting likes on social media. But too much pragmatism, and the things you do get done are not beneficial and are often detrimental to the cause of liberty. Too much idealism and not enough pragmatism is like Quixote tilting at windmills. If you go into every fight, every debate, believing that this is the most important issue, that this is not only the hill to die on, but that you will win or die trying, eventually you're going to exhaust yourself. You're going to burn yourself out. Sure, your followers might enjoy the drama and the red meat that you keep throwing them, but what are you actually doing? You're expending a lot of energy for very little return. I believe that politics is about what you can accomplish, not merely what you wish you could do. The 19th century German statesman Otto von Bismarck called it the art of the possible. A lot of idealists find the idea of pragmatism distasteful, calling it compromise, selling out, refusing to fight for what you believe. Yet history shows that compromise has always been necessary to accomplish anything. History is littered with the stories of people who refused to budge 1 inch because they believed the cause for which they were fighting was very important. Yet few today remember their names or the causes for which they fought, because they lost. Bismarck himself was very conservative at a time when people like our founding fathers were considered liberal. He was a strong supporter of the Prussian monarchy, and he opposed the idea of unification of the German peoples into a single empire. However, as he became enmeshed in the politics of the German Confederation, he became convinced that unification was necessary to counter the power of Austria. He decided that if unification was necessary, and perhaps even inevitable, then it would be better if he and his fellow conservative monarchists were controlling and guiding the process, rather than watching it play out from the sidelines. That's pragmatism. As a young man, Bismarck had watched the kingdoms of Europe fall like dominoes during the revolutions of 1848. He was determined not to allow that to happen to his beloved Prussia. He once said that, quote, "The great questions of the time will not be resolved by speeches and majority decisions. That was the great mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by iron and blood." End quote. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866 and the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 allowed Bismarck to use iron and blood to create the unified German Reich that he believed was necessary for his people's safety and prosperity. Historian Jonathan Steinberg said of Bismarck's achievements that, quote, "The scale of Bismarck's triumph cannot be exaggerated. He alone had brought about a complete transformation of the European international order. He told those who would listen what he intended to do, how he intended to do it, and he did it. He achieved this incredible feat without commanding an army, and without the ability to give an order to the humblest common soldier, without control of a major party, without public support, indeed in the face of almost universal hostility, without a majority in parliament, without control of his cabinet, and without a loyal following in the bureaucracy. He no longer had the support of the powerful conservative interest groups who had helped him achieve power. The most senior diplomats in the Foreign Service were sworn enemies, and he knew it. The Queen and the royal family hated him, and the King, emotional and unreliable, would soon have his 70th birthday. With perfect justice, In August 1866, he punched his fist on his desk and cried, "I have beaten them all. All." End quote. Following the wars and Germany's unification, Bismarck was made Chancellor, the highest political position under the Kaiser. He launched something called the Kulturkampf, literally the cultural struggle, though today we would call it a culture war, against the powerful Catholic Church in Germany. Bismarck worried that Rome had too much influence over his nation's politics. However, the Kulturkampf backfired. The Catholics responded by increasing their political involvement. Meanwhile, socialists and atheists jumped on the bandwagon to attack all Christians, which was not Bismarck's intention. Rather than continuing to fight for a lost cause, Bismarck compromised with the Catholics and the new pope who was crowned in 1878. Wise men know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em. During the 1880s, socialist parties were growing in strength in Germany. Bismarck remembered the revolutions of 1848, how poverty was used to rouse mobs large enough to overthrow governments. He sought to undercut the socialists by offering some of the same things they did: old age pensions, universal health care, which took away much of the impetus for a socialist revolution in the first place. Now, obviously, we can disagree with some of Bismarck's policies. The Prussian model for socialism eventually became the norm throughout Europe, to the dismay of free market conservatives like you and me. Yet our own government practiced a similar policy in 1948 with the Marshall Plan, delivering billions of dollars in food and aid to war-torn Europe in the hopes that it would alleviate the poverty and desperation that drove many of them into the arms of Soviet Russia. That is pragmatism, seeing the battle as it is rather than what you wish it were. Too much time and energy on the right is wasted arguing over what we wish things would be rather than taking things as they are. Yes, it would be great if America returned to God, returned to the Constitution, stopped all the DEI and LGBTQ+ nonsense, and regained some common sense. But unless you have an actual policy plan to move us in that direction, all you're doing is shouting into the wind, posting empty phrases for social media clout. The Allied military commanders in World War II had no time to worry about the battlefields on which they wished to fight. They had to fight the battles that were before them. The jungles of the South Pacific absolutely sucked, and the Japanese defenses were nearly impenetrable. The German hold on Europe was extremely difficult to break. But they had to deal with these things head on, adapting their strategies to deal with the situation at hand rather than idly wishing that things were different. Now, this is not to say there's never a time nor a place for idealism. A rational oddsmaker in 1775 would have said that the American colonists had no chance of defeating Great Britain, yet our founding fathers fought anyway, and we're all thankful that they did. The problem comes, as I alluded to before, when you treat every potential battle as the next American Revolution. Not every battle is epic and world-shattering. Not every contest is a binary choice between good and evil. I was thinking about all this last night while attending the Ada County Republicans meeting in Boise. A small murmur of a controversy came to a head last night, and I felt the same way I did in Nampa more than 4 years ago. I thought that Don Quixote was tilting at Windmills yet again. The issue at hand last night was a debate over whether or not the ACRCC should endorse Sheriff Matt Clifford, who won the Republican primary last May unopposed. His opponent in the general election is not a Democrat, but Doug Traubel, a conservative who decided to run on the Constitution Party ticket. Now, my opinion, both personally and as a Republican district chairman, is that Republican committees should not be supporting candidates from other parties who are campaigning against Republican nominees. It doesn't matter how you personally feel about a candidate. It doesn't matter if that candidate's a Democrat, a Libertarian, Constitution, or Independent. It's the job of Republican committees to elect Republican candidates, period. And the Republican candidate is determined by the primary. If nobody ran against someone like Sheriff Clifford in the primary, then he is our candidate. Now, that's not to say that individual Republicans can't support other candidates personally. We all have freedom of conscience. But party committees are different than individuals. Now, many members of the ACRCC support Doug Traubel, and have for a long time. He's campaigning as a constitutional sheriff who will fight the federal government and anyone else who would infringe upon the rights of the people. He accuses Sheriff Clifford's office of inviting Marxism, using things like implicit bias training. This election is actually the culmination of 3 years of campaigning. In 2021, Ada County Sheriff Stephen Bartlett resigned, and so it fell upon the ACRCC to submit 3 potential replacements to the Ada County Commissioners. The PCs voted to submit Trauble, a former sheriff's deputy, Mike Chilton, also a former deputy, and Matt Clifford, who was then serving as an Ada County deputy in the position of Eagle Chief of Police. You see, Eagle contracts with the Ada County Sheriff's Office to provide law enforcement services for our city. Deputies assigned to Eagle are Eagle police officers, but the infrastructure and resources are provided by the Sheriff's Office. It's a good arrangement, in my opinion. It saves Eagle taxpayers a lot of money on what would otherwise be duplicated positions. Star and CUNA also operate in the same manner. As Eagle's chief of police, Matt Clifford made it clear in the spring of 2020 that his department would not be fining or arresting Eagle citizens for not wearing masks or social distancing. My own connection with Clifford started even earlier than that. Back when I was running my IT consulting business, I decided to join the Eagle Chamber of Commerce, and the very first luncheon I attended was the one in which Clifford was introduced as the new chief of police. So the Ada County Commissioners in 2021 were Ryan Davidson, Rod Beck, and a Democrat, Kendra Kenyon. Each of the 3 potential sheriffs came with a bevy of supporters. Chilton was endorsed by former Governor Butch Otter and future Attorney General Raul Labrador. Clifford was supported by the mayors of Eagle, Star, Meridian, and CUNA, while Trauble had developed a very strong and passionate following among local conservatives. Trauble had written a book called Red Badge about how Marxism has infected law enforcement culture in America. In that book, he makes some statements that are decidedly not politically correct regarding racial differences in crime and the prevalence of Jewish people in the Russian Communist Revolution. That caused many, including Commissioner Beck, to see Trauble as a racist and anti-Semite. Now, I'm not going to go off on a rabbit trail about the details of Trauble's beliefs. If you're curious, you can go talk to him yourself. Suffice it to say, I don't think he's a racist or an anti-Semite. Rather, like Daryl Cooper talking about Churchill on Tucker Carlson's show last month, he touches on things that many people find uncomfortable to talk about. My friend and fellow Republican District Chair Lynn Bradescu, a devout and observant Jew, has defended Trauble against these accusations multiple times, and that's good enough for me. Nevertheless, things are what they are. Beck disapproved of Trauble's positions, and the Democrat commissioner surely wasn't going to support him, so they voted to appoint Matt Clifford instead. Trauble almost immediately filed to run in the 2022 GOP primary. Despite a spirited campaign with a lot of support from conservative activists, it was not close. Matt Clifford won with 65.6% of the vote. I wrote a series of articles in 2022 back on Substack endorsing various candidates, but I refrained from making a specific recommendation in this race. I ended up saying that if you believed that Idaho and Ada County were on the verge of totalitarianism, if you worry that Marxism is on the march and that these are extraordinary times that require a radical response, then vote for Trauble. However, if you believed that we're still mostly okay here in Idaho, and that what we most need is a good leader and a competent administrator to manage the largest law enforcement agency in the state, then vote Clifford. Voters in Ada County made their choice clear in 2022. Undeterred, Trauble is back again this year. Rather than running in the Republican primary, he filed instead as a candidate of the Constitution Party, meaning he could campaign all summer and all the way up to the general election. And this is what has led to the awkwardness of last night, where a Republican committee was divided over the issue of endorsing a Republican-nominated candidate. Now, there are numerous issues at play here. First, what is the role of a Republican Central Committee? How much leeway does that body have in eschewing the results of the Republican primary and recommending someone else? Now, I believe there is a time and place for Republican leaders to stand up against their own party, if necessary, to warn voters about important issues. But first, those leaders must earn the respect and confidence of the voters. If the ACRCC, as it stands now, were to endorse Trauble, or censure Clifford, or even just withhold an endorsement of Clifford when it was on the table, what would be the message to voters? Would it be A, that this is important, trust us, listen to us, and take this into account? Or would it be B, the party's been taken over by extremists and you can safely ignore them? Now, I'm not asking which would be true, which one reflects reality. I'm asking which would be the impression left on voters. I think it's pretty clear. The second issue is that all of this is a lot of sound and fury with nothing behind it. This is Quixote charging at the windmill, believing two things: that this really is a dangerous giant, and that he's going to win. Doug Trauble, no matter how much you like him, is not going to win this election. I'm sorry to say that to his passionate supporters who listen to this publication, Has nothing to do with him personally, his positions, or the very concept of a constitutional sheriff. It's just reality, basic math. He lost the GOP primary 2 years ago, and now he's on the ballot as a Constitution Party candidate. Third-party candidates almost never win. I think he'll be lucky to reach 30%. I say this as someone who likes Doug Traubel, who'd like to see him fill a role in the movement. There are still a lot of idealists in our movement, people who I believe have pure hearts and good intentions, but they're still tilting at windmills. Hold the line, they say, as if verve and vigor are enough to win the day in any situation. For these idealists, compromise is a dirty word. Pragmatism is a dirty word. Yet the more I study history, the more I see how compromise and pragmatism were necessary for pretty much every political accomplishment since the dawn of time. I think a lot of conservatives subconsciously believe that our Constitution was handed down by God, like the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. In reality, it was the product of tremendous discussion, debate, and yes, compromise by incredibly well-read and wise men. The final document, along with the Bill of Rights, was a compromise between big states and small states, the wealthy and the poor, big government advocates like Alexander Hamilton, and state sovereignty men like George Mason. Had Mason, Alexander, James Madison, or Patrick Henry held the line on any one issue, it's likely the United States of America would never have been born. Consider also slavery. That's as moral an issue as there ever was. Leftists like to remind us that Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder, therefore anything good he ever said or did is invalid. Now, it's true that Jefferson owned slaves, as did all the wealthy gentlemen of Virginia in his day. But it's also true that Jefferson saw slavery as a moral evil. Is that a contradiction? Sure. But as Walt Whitman said, we're all large, and we contradict ourselves. Jefferson saw slavery as a moral evil, yet he did not have the power to end it by himself. He could not simply snap his fingers and end the institution of slavery. Even just freeing his slaves might have been the worse evil. Where would they go? What would they do? In the short term, is it not possible that he believed that treating them fairly and compassionately would be better for them than setting them free into a dangerous and cruel world? Jefferson wanted to lay the blame for the evils of slavery on King George III in the Declaration of Independence, but the southern states would not allow it. Should he have held the line there? Even Abraham Lincoln was not so morally black and white as we might want to think. He too understood political pragmatism. When the Civil War began, Lincoln sent Major General John C. Fremont west to ensure that the slave state of Missouri did not join the Confederacy. Fremont was an abolitionist. He saw the opportunity to make a difference, so he issued an Emancipation Proclamation freeing all the slaves in Missouri. Lincoln, later known as the Great Emancipator himself, not only forced Fremont to rescind the proclamation, but he fired him. Do you remember reading that in your history class? You see, Lincoln was pragmatic. Keeping the slave states of Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland in the Union was one of his top priorities, and if he allowed military generals to free those slaves, essentially stealing the property of the wealthy men of those border states, no matter how distasteful it sounds to us to phrase it that way, then it would likely drive those states into the arms of Jefferson Davis. Now, later in the war, Lincoln issued his own Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves of all the states in rebellion, but again, leaving the border slave states alone. His reasons were pragmatic. Issuing the proclamation at that time changed the character of the war from a simple rebellion into a moral crusade against the evil institution of slavery. This made it nearly impossible for European nations, which had already abolished slavery in their own countries, to intervene on the side of the Confederacy. Lincoln was wise and he was pragmatic, which is why we remember him and his deeds today. He made a difference. Neither pure idealism nor pure pragmatism are good by themselves. Wise men and women know when to compromise and when to hold the line, when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. Lincoln decided in 1861 that it was too early for emancipation in Missouri, but 1863 was just right for the proclamation. And then, of course, he supported passage of the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery altogether, in 1865, just prior to his death. Quixote's two errors were in believing that windmills were giants and that he was going to win the battle. Wise conservatives must evaluate each situation accordingly. Is this a hill to die on? If so, can I win this battle? Not everything is an epic battle of good versus evil. Idealists like to characterize every dispute in this manner because it's more exciting to be fighting on the side of good against evil rather than just arguing over the wording of some minor tax bill. This leads to a secondary temptation in which you elevate your side to sainthood while castigating your opponents as devils. For many supporters of Doug Trauble, it's not enough to say that he'd make a good sheriff and protect our rights from overreaching government. They have to also make Sheriff Clifford into the devil, a Marxist plant who's scheming to destroy our community. As someone who has known Clifford for 5 years now, I find that absurd. Imagine if you only ever watched highlight reels of NFL games. You might start to believe that every game was non-stop highlights, fingertip catches, clutch field goals, barreling runs for the end zone. You'd be shocked to actually sit down and watch a real game and find out that much of it is kind of mundane. A 3-yard run up the middle, a short pass to a tight end for a first down, a good punt to establish solid field position. Not every play is a make-or-break Hail Mary situation. It's the same thing in the world of politics. Not every situation is an epic battle of good versus evil. Not every opponent is the devil incarnate. And not every windmill is a giant. The second thing to evaluate is whether or not we can win the battle before us. No matter how much Doug Trauble supporters believe in his cause, the chance of him winning this November is almost nil. Now, you might have good reasons for spending your time and energy on this campaign. Perhaps it's a cause you really believe in, and you're showing the community where you stand. Perhaps you believe it will pay off later if you can just move the ball downfield for a future campaign. That's fine, and kudos to everyone who's doing that. We need people on the vanguard of the discourse, pushing the Overton window rightward and making room for the rest of us to get things done. Yet, remember that all resources, including our own time and energy, are finite. What's the opportunity cost for supporting a lost cause? Could you be moving the ball even further by putting your time and energy to use elsewhere? It reminds me of another story from history. Bonnie Prince Charlie was the son of the exiled Stuart King of England and Scotland. At the age of 25, he landed at Glenfinnan in the Scottish Highlands and raised an army of Highlanders to regain his father's throne. They won some amazing victories, and they even captured Edinburgh. They were on their way to London when King George's son, the Duke of Cumberland, landed with his battle-hardened professional army. Prince Charlie retreated into Scotland, pursued by Cumberland. He had to know that he could not defeat the government army in a pitched battle, but eventually, exhausted and out of room to run, he faced Cumberland at Culloden Moor. The Highlanders were slaughtered, and the Bonnie Prince had to escape, disguised as a kitchen maid. He never returned to Britain again. You have to know when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em. I try to tell people that you should never pick a fight unless you know you're going to win. For the ACRCC, it means taking easy wins that gain cachet and confidence with Ada County voters. Once you have that, then you can occasionally go out on a limb, knowing that you've earned their trust and they'll take you seriously. Until then, going out on a limb just means a long fall and a sudden stop at the end. General Norman Schwarzkopf, architect of the massively successful Operation Desert Storm, said that you must enter a battle with overwhelming force. You don't want to leave things to chance. Do the work beforehand to prepare the battlefield rather than just leaving anything to chance. As Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, victorious soldiers win first and then go to war, while defeated soldiers go to war and hope to win. Folks, we have to stop tilting at windmills. It's a waste of time and it makes us look foolish. Let's pick our battles. Start with small things that we can win, and then we can build up to the epic fights. Now I know, small things are boring. A 3-yard run for a first down is not nearly as exciting as an 85-yard touchdown pass. But throwing the long bomb on every play is a surefire way to lose the game. I want to win the game. I want to see conservative policies enacted in Idaho that safeguard this state for my children and their children. I want to demoralize the left, to induce them to pack up and go back to California and leave us alone. I want to move the Overton window so far to the right that Brad Little looks like a radical Democrat. But doing that means slow and steady progress, choosing our battles, and efficiently allocating our resources. The purpose of politics is not to get the most likes on Facebook or Twitter, or get a trending video of some soundbite you made on TikTok. It's to enact policies based on our principles of life and liberty. Anything else is a distraction from that goal. My name is Brian Allman, and this has been the podcast of the Gem State Chronicle. Visit gemstatechronicle.com for more, and I'll talk to you next time.